Hello, my soccer universe. The big one is ahead of us, the Champions League Final this Saturday evening, 9 o'clock in Munich. And while we have an English winner in the Europa League, we have an English winner in the Conference League, there won't be an English winner in the Champions League, largely because these guys have eliminated every single English team. And so we have a final of outsiders. How often did we have a French against Italian final? Not that often. It is PSG against Inter. And the last time I think a French and an Italian final met in the Champions League final was the first ever Champions League final when, of course, Marseille beat my Milan. So, signs? Potentially. French teams have only won that single Champions League. Italian teams, of course, were way more successful in that one. You may be wondering about my voice. Yesterday I watched Lask's 3-1 home win against Rapid, and yes, my voice took a little bit beating on that one, but I hope you will bear with me. Now, this final is a rather intriguing one. We have two teams whose big goal is to win the Champions League. Yes, PSG said ahead of the season it's not the obsession anymore, whereas Inter actually went into this season saying we wanna win this Champions League. They were so close 2 years ago when they met Manchester City. They really thought they should have done better last season when Inter was arguably a better team than they are this season, and now it was all about the Champions League for them. And so they are in the final after, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, this wonderful matchup with Barcelona. I don't quite expect this in the final, although we will have a similar clash of styles. In this video, as usual, I want to first talk about the host city and the host venue. Then we look at the pathway to the final of these two teams. Then we also compare these two teams. And in the end, let's talk a little bit about that final, how it might go, who will win it, all covered in this video. For the fifth time in the competition's history, Munich is hosting the final of the Champions League or the European Cup. However, it's only the second time that it will be hosted in the Allianz Arena. And rather fun fact, every time a final has been hosted in Munich, we had a new winner. And we'll see what will happen this year. Will we get a new winner? That will be PSG, or will it be Inter who breaks that streak? However, Italians in Munich have not fared well. Milan and Juve both losing when they were huge favorites. Now, as for Munich itself, it's of course the capital of Bavaria, one of the big cities in Germany. In fact, it's the third biggest city in Germany, has plenty of sites and plenty of stuff to offer. It is very close to the Alps, and there's this famous panorama that you always see with the mountains in the background. Looks rather impressive. However, you will be surprised if you ever go to Munich how flat the city actually is, because it is in the flatlands around the Isar River. And yes, so there are no mountains, but it's very, very close, similar to where I'm living here in Linz, where we also have about an hour to go into the mountains. Same thing is true for Munich. What is Munich known for? I mean, you have, of course, the famous Marienplatz, the old town with the Frauenkirche, all that kind of stuff, the nice market along and a lot of towers. You have, of course, the beer culture, with the Hofbräuhaus being the most prominent one. Oktoberfest is one big thing, but that is not happening during the Champions League final. And then there's also the more modern Munich, and this is the one thing I always find curious about Munich. You can see when you compare Munich and Vienna, two cities of very similar sizes. In Vienna, there's this huge historic center that is actually expanding quite out. In Munich, you very quickly go into more modern buildings because Munich was not as big of a city as Vienna historically. However, it grew out, especially in the past century, because it was only the residence of the Bavarian kings, and then it became a huge center for innovation. And we have major companies having, of course, the headquarters in Munich, and the biggest one of those, of course, is BMW, where we have the 4-cylindrical building that is also a hallmark of Munich, very close to the Olympia Park, where the Olympic Stadium is in there. One of the most iconic stadiums. On one side, I'm really sad to not see games in there anymore. It was a stadium that I visited quite often. On the other side, I understand it has a running track. Now it's mostly a concert venue. The final itself, as we already said, will be in the Allianz Arena. This was a stadium that was built in the run-up to the 2006 World Cup. It was a very innovative design at the time. Munich needed to get another innovative arena after this iconic Olympic Olympiastadion. They have now a arena that has many panels that can be lit in all kind of different colors, like the other two stadiums that were hosting the European finals this year. However, Munich was the first one to really do that, and they can go really wild. Meanwhile, most of the time you see it in red because it hosts Bayern Munich, but it can literally be in any color. When the German national team is playing, it's usually either German flag or a white stadium. During the last Champions League final, it was white with a bluish and greenish tone. It is rather impressive. However, it also led to its nickname, because the structure looks a little bit like what we in German say Schlauchboot, meaning a dinghy, so, you know, an inflatable boat. And that's the nickname, and that's the nickname I'm also using here, because we don't have any sponsorship names in UEFA competitions, and I really hate the name Fußballstadion München or, you know, Football Stadium Munich. I want to call it the Schlauchboot Arena because it just fits. So let's look at the pathways to the final. We'll start with PSG. The league phase for PSG was not a rather successful one. Actually, they just made it in with a late surge, and it was really characterized by either very late wins that were not deserved or very late losses. Girona at home, they won it with the last shot of the game. Yes, they were better, but Girona was so close of getting a point out of PSG. Then they lose against Arsenal away from home, an almost nothing performance. PSV 1-1 at home. Also, not a great performance. When they took on Atletico Madrid, had 1-0 lead, and then Atletico Madrid win it at the end, totally against the run of play. And you could already see that this PSG team is actually playing quite nicely. There's a lot of great ideas in there. However, the end product is still missing. And then again, another nothing performance, 1-0 away from home at Bayern Munich. So they already had some experience at the Allianz Arena, but was not a good one. But then they win out. At that moment, it really looked like a PSG might miss out on the knockout stage. However, they beat Salzburg 3-0 away from home. Then Manchester City, this was at the beginning of the year, a really impressive performance, a 4-2 win. Manchester City, a team in similar trouble as PSG, but this was the first exclamation point. And then Stuttgart away from home, 4-1. A draw would have been enough for both teams to advance, but PSG went there and completely outplayed Stuttgart. At that moment, you're already feeling that PSG might be the best team in Europe already. They have clicked and managed a turnaround. And so when they took on fellow French side Brest, who were the sensation so far, Brest never stood a chance, losing 10-0 on aggregate. And then came probably PSG's signature performance against Liverpool. Liverpool, who had won the league phase, who were considered the big favorites at the time, they completely outplayed Liverpool at the Parc des Princes. However, very late on, Liverpool snatched an unlikely winner, quickly equalized in the return leg by Ousmane Dembélé. And then it was a really exciting up and down game. No more goals scored, but the chances were there. But you always felt that PSG is the slightly better team. It goes all the way to penalties, where Donnarumma steps up large, saves I think 2 penalties, and PSG win it 4-1. Big exclamation point there. And from that, it was only English teams. Against Aston Villa, a similar performance, 3-1 at home. At the end, they made it a little bit more comfortable for themselves. And then they even had a 2-0 lead at Villa. However, Villa came back, and that was the one thing where it was also, is this PSG team really that good? Because if Villa score one more, and if this goes all the way to overtime, I actually am not sure if PSG will go through. There was a real short period where Villa had plenty of chances. In the end, though, this PSG team, as they say in Spanish, suffered well enough and saw it out. At Arsenal, also fully deserved 1-0 win. I know Arsenal had 1 or 2 big chances, but overall I really thought that PSG probably could have won this one with 2 goals as well. Arsenal put a lot of pressure on PSG in the return leg. However, again, similar to Villa, they were pressed up high. This was something that PSG didn't like. However, they weathered the storm. Donnarumma stood tall once again, and then they scored the go-ahead goal. Makes the second one, and only very late on, Arsenal came back, and in the end, it was overall a very impressive win. So PSG have eliminated the entire Premier League, if you would like, and that is a real hallmark, and it showed that this PSG team is a really cohesive young team and also stable enough to suffer. Inter started the Champions League campaign with what was then considered a really impressive result, a 0-0 away at Manchester City, where they just defended everything away that Manchester City threw at them. And this was the hallmark in the league phase for Inter. a really sound defense, very much in contrast to what they were showing in the league. A 4-0 at home to Cervena Svestar, 1-0 away from home at Young Boys, all not big results to talk home about. The 1-0 at home against Arsenal, that was a real statement performance as well, because Arsenal were flying also high, but Inter completely nullified them and got a deserved win. Beating Leipzig again 1-0 at home, you thought that Inter cannot be breached. However, Leverkusen completely dominated Inter. This was probably one of the worst performances I've seen Inter have, but it really seemed like they might get out with a 0 draw, but then Leverkusen win that one. Another nondescript performance away from home, 1-0 at Sparta Prague, followed then by a 3-0 at home to Monaco, which is the second highest win. However, Monaco also had a very early red card. However, Inter finished in 4th place, meaning they could skip the playoff and looked really poised the way that the bracket then set up for them to make a deep run in this competition. They then faced Feyenoord, and I think they were happy that they faced Feyenoord, that Milan messed that one up, because Inter did not play well against Milan this season at all. They have never beaten them. Feyenoord, however, they had no trouble disposing of them 4-1 on aggregate. Then the big clash against Bayern Munich, away from home. Bayern were dominant in the first half. Harry Kane missing a big seater, however, then Lautaro Martinez with a brilliant goal gives them the lead. Bayern managed, I think, an equalizer, but then late on it's Fratesi who strikes. Inter get the 2-1 away win. And in the return leg, a little bit more of the same. And again, Bayern take the lead. However, then Inter, in very quick succession, turned it around 2-1, but there were still some nervy moments when Bayern equalized, and in the end, they needed to see that one out. But you could already see that when you play against higher-class opponent, this Inter defense can be gotten at. And that's exactly what happened against Barcelona, where they could be gotten at. But they really played into the weaknesses of Barcelona and had a quick 2-0 lead on the Montjuic that Barcelona then equalized, and it really seemed like only a matter of time until Barcelona will take the lead, especially in the first half. In the second half, though, Inter were better, and it was only a brilliant strike by Rafinha that actually got Barca out with a 3-3 home draw in one of the craziest first legs that I've ever seen. However, it got even better in the second one. And this was Inter against Barca in its purest form. Barca, brilliant attack. Inter, brilliant on the counter-attack, and that was a real joy to watch. I repeat myself, probably the best tie I've ever seen. Inter had a 2-0 lead again, but Barca this time turned it around, but Barca only led for a little bit when Acerbi steps up in the opposing box. I still cannot believe how Barca allowed that goal, and it goes to overtime, where then I think Fratesi found the winner and Inter go through. It's this resilience of Inter that really came through in the latter stages when Inter were already tired. It's an old team that was tired, but they always pulled out resources to achieve their goal. If we compare these two teams, I mean, historically, I have to say that Inter is the bigger team. They are 20-time Italian champions. Meanwhile, PSG have 13 championships, but they all came very, very recently because they have so much more funds than the rest of the league. So it's almost a non-competition. PSG also have more cup wins, but again, most of them more recent. 9 cup wins for Inter, and some of them also coming relatively recent. I also found, a little bit low of a total, because I always thought that Inter is good in the Coppa Italia. But then when we go to European competitions, this is where Inter shines over PSG. Inter have won 3 Champions League / European Cups. They have thrice won the UEFA Cup or the Europa League as well. All 3 of these coming in the 90s when it was still the UEFA Cup. But PSG have the solitary Cup Winners' Cup in 1996. In the head-to-head, they never won in a competitive match. However, they had friendlies. The first 3 friendlies were all won by PSG, the last 2 by Inter. But you cannot really bank much on friendlies, but slight edge for PSG. Huge edge when it comes to market value. PSG almost €1 billion, whereas Inter is sitting at 660 million euros in the squad value. So that definitely speaks for PSG, who of course have more financial might. Whereas Inter squad is more taking some older players and putting them for a last hooray. In terms of age, Inter is on average 6 years older than PSG. So it's the young and wild against the old and wily. This is something we haven't seen much. Also, Inter have more international players representing their country than PSG does. Maybe because there are so many young players that don't not make it into the France squad, potentially. But there, a surprising edge for Inter, I gotta say. So let's get to the final itself. The referee for the final will be Istvan Kovac. Ever since I do the preview, this is already the third time that he is refereeing a final. He was first in a conference final where Roma beat Feyenoord. He had a horrible whistle-swallowing performance, I have to say. Then he had last year's Europa League final and now this year's Champions League final. But, you know, I think he has established himself as one of the better referees in Europe. Also, he has a Hungarian-sounding name, but he is from Romania. As for the jersey matchup, PSG is the designated home team, so they will wear the home jersey, which I of course have recently acquired up there, whereas Inter could have opted for their away jersey in white. No, they went for the yellow one. I think it will make for a more interesting viewing color-wise. I really do not like that jersey in particular. The white jersey I think would have been, in my opinion, a little bit more proper, but on the other side it's also a rather bland jersey. In any case, I don't have a yellow Inter jersey, but I decided to wear the third kit for this section of the video. Now, how do I see this game going? I would think that PSG will dominate that one, whereas Inter will sit deep. Or will we? I mean, to me, there's a Champions League phase to Inter, there's a Serie A phase. In Serie A, Inter very often is dominant. And this is such a stark contrast to what we see, so they can do both things. However, with the energy and the style that PSG have, I think Inter will sit back again and hope that Çalhanoğlu and Barella can at least nullify the PSG midfield. A lot will hinge how much can you put into play Lautaro and Thuram, if both can play, and it looks like both can play, and also how much can Denzel Dumfries can get into this game to hurt PSG, but it will be mostly on the counter-attack. Inter will have superiority when it comes to dead ball situations. Inter will be more physical. Inter have a real goal-scoring threat up front, which is where I don't quite see PSG. However, I find PSG overall a much more well-rounded team, a real team that is working together, that also can dart forward with Hakimi, who of course has an Inter past and has some of the most brilliant players on the planet assembled. I personally feel that PSG are the better team. However, there's a certain resilience to Inter where I really can see some fight back. I could see Inter trying to identify some of the weaknesses of PSG like they did against Barcelona and maybe take an early lead. However, then they will have to suffer, and will they be able to hold on? Inter also has probably a slightly deeper bench than PSG does by design. However, the quality that PSG can bring on the field is just better, I would say. And for that reason, I personally favor PSG. I also think that the bookies are right to favor PSG. I think if PSG doesn't win this one, it is because they did not do the homework. Curiously enough, my model sees it as a 50-50, even giving the slightest edge of Inter. Inter still have a higher rating on the ELO rating. However, I really think that PSG is rightly considered the favorite. I don't want to give you a prediction because I have a clear dog in the game, and despite me wearing an Inter jersey, I'm a Milan fan. I really want PSG to win this final, but I'm not gonna give you a prediction on that one because I really don't want to jinx it. I think a lot will depend on how tall will Donnarumma stand when Inter has an attack. I honestly think it will be decided in regulation. Note that we have now a string since 2018 of finals being won by only a solitary goal. So once a goal is scored, it's very likely that's the only one. And that's rather unusual for Champions League final. I actually want to see more goals scored. Maybe those two teams can deliver. A final fun fact that I just need to add is that Inter have just lost the Scudetto to Napoli. Napoli and PSG fans actually do like each other. So there's an added wrinkle to that. Add to it Kvaratskhelia, of course, coming from Napoli. So yeah, the question is, will he be able to play? He did not play in the French Cup final. Lastly, PSG already have won 2 titles, whereas Inter missed out on 2 titles domestically already. So for Inter, it's really the last chance. So now I turn it over to you. How do you see this game going? Who will win it? Will it be the young and wild ones from PSG winning their first ever Champions League title, or will get Inter with the old and Wiley squad a 4th title? Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this preview. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like these, and I will talk to you soon about more things in my soccer universe. Bye! Hey there, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, here are some videos and playlists that you may enjoy too. Also, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the little bell icon so you get notified whenever something happens in my soccer universe. And with that, have a wonderful day. Bye.